So just before we start, just want to acknowledge that we are with Wanyamaja people on Mudjinji country here in Babinda. Down the road is the beautiful Bunabinda, the boulders. And just to acknowledge that this country it's a beautiful country, and we want to acknowledge that there's continuing connection between land, water and community, and wanting to pay respects to all our elders, yours and mine. We extend that respect to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present and listening to our podcasts online. I'm your host today. My name is Sandra Levers. My father is a Jabbergai man, Jabbergunji from the Kuranda area, and my mother's mother comes from the Yuwaalaayi people in Northern Australia. I've been blessed to grow up around the black politics in this country and have been a part of that really strong struggle. So it gives me great pleasure to be here. This is the second podcast in the National Treaty Alliance, Let's Talk Treaty, and I'm going to hand straight over to you, Barb. I know that you've got a lot to say on this subject, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. I want to recognise the sovereignty of the people on whose land we all sit today and have this discussion. I am Oongi, the Paddymel Wallaby, my mother's side, a matrilineal clan of the Yuwaalaayi nation. I'm Yudandali, the Trigawana, on my father's side, the Gomeroi people, and I'm Bigambul, my family from the Darling Downs in Queensland who were nearly wiped out in the 1800s. I want to start a little about growing up and knowing about my family who were activists, are activists, and a bit of the story about our experiences. And that will bring me to a discussion about where we're at today. In the 1800s, my great-great-granny Susan lived on Welltown Station in the Darling Downs, just near Goondiwindi, Boggabella and Fallon in New South, across the border, across the Whitefellas border. She was concerned about the encroachment on her lands, her people's lands, in the mid-1800s as the settlers moved out west and took their cattle with them. They were going to build their empires out there and make lots of money. Her people developed a campaign where they went out and killed hundreds of cattle and left them lying there. They never took them for food. They left them lying there to rot. The settlers would restock and they would kill their cattle. And this went on for a while, and the settlers moved away to look for other lands that they could occupy. Granny Susan was given a queen plate from the government, an old tactic of queen plates and king plates, and she was known as Queen Susan of Welltown Station. She hardly ever wore her plate because she said it was too heavy, but it was a way for the government to think, or whitefellas to think, that all they had to do was negotiate anything with one person in the community. They didn't have to talk to everybody. And I remember my experiences in Alice Springs when the NT government tried to change the sacred sites legislation. And one of the components that they wanted to introduce into that legislation was to be able to negotiate with one person. And a lot of the old people came in from out of town and camped on the lawns opposite the courthouse on a winter's night, and they'd made little campfires to keep warm. The local council turned on the sprinklers and I got a phone call to go down and see what was happening. was arrested by the police by having a big mouth, trying to turn off the sprinklers. So from Granny Susan's days, what happened after that was a select committee was brought together in Brisbane, and the outcome of that select committee was to set up the Native Police. The Native Police then took government and police to a lot of places, including the Bigambul country, and killed people. And the population of great Granny Susan's people was reduced from about 3,000 to about 300. I want to talk about my great Granny Ada. Granny Ada was 108 when she died, and I was 13 when she died, and she lived with us. So I knew her very well and learned a lot about our people from Granny Ada. Well, the population in New South Wales had been reduced to about 8,000 Aboriginal people around the turn of the century. And the next government idea was we'll round them up, put them on stations or reserves, and they will die out. So a lot of people across Western New South Wales, the top part of Northwest New South Wales, Western New South Wales, were taken to Anglewood. People from Tibooburra, Wanaring, Burke, Gomeroi, Rewarrina, Walgett, Lightning Ridge, all those places. This was an era that the government called smoothing the dying pillow. My mother was born on Anglewood Station and part of Yuwaalaayi country. And we'd been there often. She'd taken us and shown us the tree that she was born under, delivered by one of our own midwives. Part of our country is the Sacred Narran Lake, where a lot of our stories come from, and part of what flows into what the whitefellas call the Darling River. We call it the Barker. The Barker is our river. And I'll talk about that a bit later on too. And the stories that flowed all the way down to the Kooyong, South Australia, and empties into the ocean there. It's a codfish dreaming story. So Granny Ada and my nan, Sylvia, and my mum, and her two brothers, Uncle Jack Walford and Uncle Albert Walford, were on Anglewood Station. At the age of 12, my mother was sent to a nearby station to look after the white family, to cook, to clean, to look after the children. She was 12 years old. And a letter that we have that was written to the Protection Board from the missus of the station said, Isabel is quite a good girl until her mother comes to visit and she gets very upset and wants to go with her mother. Talks about the inhumanity of the white people who were around those days, and a lot of them are still around today. Nan got Mum a job at the Brewarrina Hospital, so she went to work there and was allowed to get away from that system. It was called the apprenticeship system, indentured labour or slavery. Australia's never acknowledged that there was slavery carried out in this country. There was. My dearly beloved Nan, who died at the age of 65 from diabetes complications, having been told nothing about the disease, was part of the stolen generation. She was one of 9 children. All of the girls were sent to Cootamundra Girls' Home to be trained as slaves in white people's houses. Thank you, Bayami, for sending her back to us. And I got to live with her before I started school, and I loved her so much. She taught me the stories of the river. Then I'll talk about my grandfather, Mick Flick. Mick Flick served in the First World War. Private Mick Flick, 4292, 29th Battalion, on the Western Front and the Somme in France. To his great surprise, he was treated like a buddy by the white soldiers. They all looked after each other. He got to experience what it was like to be what was known as an Australian, even though they served under the Imperial forces. When Pop came home, my father and my dad's sisters and brothers were excluded from the school. He was not entitled to the resettlement program that the government had introduced to resettle soldiers who had served in the war. Pop took up a block of Western Lands lease on the edge of town at Gomeroi, and 40 Flick kids, parents, aunties, uncles, grandparents, great-granny Ada, got to grow up together. We were not poor. We were very rich in things that matter. So I was the first generation that got to go to school. And I was told often, the reason you go to school is to learn how they think. So it was a big priority in the lives of the Flicks that the children be sent to school. Pop put in applications to join the RSL club because he wanted to talk to his old mates about their experiences, which were horrific, and to heal. But no, he couldn't join the RSL clubs. He put in applications for land, some of his country land, in Gundabluey, Myambla, those places. We don't think the applications ever went through. They were kept in the local RSL office. Pop got to witness the great educated anthropologist who came to Gomeroi in 1938 to cut down the 84 carved trees on the Bora ground just outside Gomeroi, to preserve them for us, to take them away. So they took them away. So I'll move on. My father was an activist. My father was harassed by police and dragged down the steps of Parliament House in 1991 when the amendments to the New South Wales Land Rights Act went through. 9 people were arrested that day and 6 of them were from the Flick family. The amendments to the Land Rights Act ripped out the guts of the power of the people. There are 3 tiers in the New South Wales Land Rights Act, 1983. There were the State Land Council, who we always campaigned should meet 3 or 4 times a year to give out the funds for the regional and local councils to buy back land and to support them to claim land. The local Aboriginal land councils were given enough money for people to set up an office in their little towns, to buy a Toyota and to employ somebody to answer the phones. And that's probably still the case today. The regional land councils were the most important part of the legislation, which is now gone forever, and there's been little land claimed back or given back since that time. The State Land Council has now become a bureaucracy with millions and millions and millions of dollars. People have fought for land rights in this country since old James Cook arrived down here at Gomeroi, Botany Bay, just behind me. Gomeroi. Those people saw them coming in, and the devastation then began. The frontier wars began. By 1850, Governor Burke decided that he needed some land rules in New South Wales. So he took the land legislation from Britain, which certainly was a feudal system, and plonked them on top of us, and claimed that, and they still claim today, that us Murrays never had any land laws. The problem with their saying that is they don't speak the language. Our land laws are written in our rivers, our waterways, our oceans, our seas, our plants, our animals, the leaves on our trees. Our land laws are written all over, and we could read them. We can still read them. We know which country we belong to. But they claimed, that if you could write in a book with a pen, that became law. It's not law. And that's why we are still sovereign people today. So I'll skip a long period of time now and come to the Uluru Statement. People once again went to Uluru from all around the country. Most of the people, very few individuals, I don't believe, came for the right reasons. But most of the people who came with a good heart. They came to talk about what we could hope for and what we might achieve in the future. And they talked about being included in the Constitution. And they talked about truth-telling and to have a treaty. We are not minority people in this country. We are sovereign people in this country, and we maintain our sovereignty. Doesn't matter what they say. I don't know the implications on our sovereignty of being included in the Constitution, so I'm very wary about what might happen there. The voice, surely, in the 21st century, we are sick of being advisors to this government. Totally reject it. I'm offended by it. We are not advisors. You can't put up one Murray person in a parliament to speak on behalf of every Murray person across this country. Wimpicha, Noongas. We maintain our sovereign lands individually, and we maintain our sovereignty as a nation. So the voice is just another trick. It's a trick. And a lot of money and effort is going into promote it as the answer. And a lot of people that I respect, a lot of non-Indigenous people, think that it's the answer. It's not. And we should reject it. Truth-telling has to be told. You can't have reconciliation, inclusion in the Constitution, or a voice in Parliament until you deal with the unfinished business in this country. We're not going to leap into this. We're going to say to the government, it's not time for that discussion. It's not time. We're not ready. I was watching television like most of you were when that awful person went into the school at Yuwaalaayi, Texas, and killed 19 children and 2 teachers. And I was deeply saddened by that and thought, how can a human being do something like this? What has society become? And my thoughts immediately went to the over 400 of my people massacred mass murdered. Massacred is right, nice technical word in my view. They were murdered by white people who rode in at night while they were sitting around their campfires and putting their children to bed, shot them, and slashed them to pieces with their sabres. Nobody came to help them either. They weren't punished. That grief, that burden of grief, stays with me still. And a lot of our mob from around that area. So this is all unfinished business. You don't learn about that at school. You know what the right-wing press are talking about today is that Adam Goods' story book is being read at schools, and that's a terrible thing because he didn't get his facts right. Whose facts didn't he get right? He certainly got our facts right. They just don't like the stories. They attack us all the time. So we were thinking about this, and I rang Michael Mansell one day and I said, Michael, there's nobody talking about this business, about a treaty, except the government mob. So Michael and I had a discussion, and then he got to talk to other people and organised a Zoom meeting. And about 40 people were on that Zoom meeting from all around Australia. And we all talked about how we needed a ground-based group of people, a coalition of people, without any white fella governance structure around it, to talk about this, because their voices weren't being heard. It was just the voice of government that took on this role. And still there's very little detail coming out from government. So what we want to do is, we talked more often about it, and I was lying in bed one night, we thought, what are we going to call ourselves? How can we identify ourselves, so that people know who we are and what our aspirations are? And I was lying in bed and I thought, Treaty Alliance, that's it. And I called Michael the next day, and Michael and I were talking about, and he said, what about National Treaty Alliance? So I said, yes. So we've been building a coalition across the country. Very slow process because we don't have funds to run big television ads, or most of us now are not in organisations and have some sort of access to resources. But we'll get there, and we are going to start talking and meeting with people in our regions and areas very soon. So once again, we have, like we always have had, the old people led the campaign for land rights in New South Wales. They're all gone. They've gone to the dream time. My parents have gone to the dream time. I'll meet up with them one day. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, our great-great-grandparents. But they all fought the struggle. And we continue to fight it today. Most of us do. A lot of our organisations now have been turned into bureaucracies, or the government has amended legislation to make it worthless anymore. They have the power and the resources, a lot of these Aboriginal organisations, to mount a huge campaign to talk about what our future should be. But they're not doing that. They're not doing that. And I'm coming after them. They are drifting under the radar. People are too frightened to say their names anymore. But you go to a community and they'll tell you who's ruling the roost and that they have no power. So where was the power in the generations before us? It was in their dewey, their spirit, their soul, their knowing the truth and talking the truth. And that's what we have to create again. But like the New South Wales Land Rights Act, like the native title legislation, like the Heritage Act that's being amended now in New South Wales, like the recovery bill before Parliament in New South Wales today that hardly anybody knows about it, and the New South Wales Land Council aren't talking about the potential of a lot of our hard-fought gains through our joint management of national parks can be taken away by the stroke of a pen of the minister. That's where we're at today. So my message today to people is get active again. Don't be afraid to speak out. Especially in local communities, you're going to be criticised. You know, when my auntie and my mum desegregated the picture theatre at Collie and did other things that stood up to government, our local people used to say, gee, those flicks make you shame, eh? Don't worry about that. They all got houses. They got plumbing. They got electricity. Whilst we continue to live in a home built by our fathers with tin, with the dirt floor and none of those things. And we were much happier. So if you hear people say, gee, they make you shame, stand up to them. Be bold. Be proud. Think of the old people. Let them live inside your dewey, inside your spirit. And don't forget the sacrifices they made for you. And don't forget that every step, every campaign we have run, thinking that we had won, no, sorry, the government will get a small group of Murrays together and nut out the legislation that's supposed to reflect our ambitions. They make amendments, water down the things that we've achieved. I look around me and there's not many of my generation left today. They're all gone to the dream time. And I look at a lot of young people who are supposed to represent our interests. They don't represent our interests, they represent their own. They don't know the stories about country. They're not interested. So I just encourage everybody to think carefully about what a treaty might achieve and to stand with us. Yellow.
Barbara, as always, I'm energised and inspired by your words, so thank you very much for that. I see the same things that you're seeing, and I think that it is time to take back the reins. I think it is time that we started mobilising again, because all will be lost, and we'll just be white people with black skins without any real substance to who we are. So thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. You've hit home with some really hard truths, and I hope people will listen to this. So thank you very much.